I'm Megan Hamilton, and this is the Embracing Enchantment podcast. So I first heard about the concept of collapse from today's guest. I had followed her for a few years, thoroughly enjoying her witchy and ancestral content, watching her build outdoor beds using furs and hides that she'd stretched and tanned herself, growing a giant pumpkin and being absolutely invested in its final weight, and participating in her Witches New Year workshops. As we are faced with the magnitude of change that has been happening, she has written a new book that just arrived in the mail for me today. Please welcome our guest, Carmen Spagnola.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for good memories.
Oh, I have such fond memories of doing work with you. And I meant to ask you beforehand, and I apologize. It is Spagnola. Did I get it right?
Yeah,
okay.
Spagnola like lasagna. That's what I tell
I love it. I also love lasagna. Okay, so Carmen, I'm going to pull a tarot card for us to center and perhaps provide a moment of reflection. In your introduction, you say, apocalypse is a somewhat dramatic word to describe collapse. It sounds almost mythical, but it's actually a rather mundane experience of ever-eroding infrastructure, ideology, social fabric, and ecosystems. Things limp along for quite a while before they are suddenly and sometimes shockingly rendered non-functional. Collapse, I'm getting goosebumps as I'm saying this. Collapse is like descending a staircase and missing the last few steps. It happens slowly, and then all of a sudden, you find yourself in a heap, shaking and disoriented and likely in a lot of pain. You knew you were going down, but you didn't expect to land quite so hard. So I think many of us, for those who have maybe seen it coming for a while, or for those who didn't expect this at all and are feeling this way right now, can you talk a little bit about how you came to understand that collapse was on the way and how you have been preparing for it?
Well, it became apparent to me, actually, this comes up in my first book, The Spirited Kitchen. I went through a bankruptcy, and this was propelled by the Great Recession in 2008. And I'm Canadian and had grown up with this idea of a social safety net. And I found out, the long story short, is I found out that actually you can't get welfare unless you have less than $150 in your account. And so you can see that you're not going to be able to pay rent, but you actually can't even apply until you're like actually that desperate. And I just sort of realized that there was the cracks, in society, that I was like, oh, I'm falling in one of those cracks. And I became a very thoughtful and devoted student of these cracks, and came to understand what collapse is. And I follow a model that was explained in a book called The Long Descent by John Michael Greer, who used to be the Archdruid, Grand Archdruid of North America or something like that, or of America. And in the stair step of collapse, as I'm describing in Spells for the Apocalypse, it's that you're going down a step and it's like, whoa, something calamitous has happened to me. But then it kind of evens out for a while. And you think, okay, I'm going to recover. I'm, oh, we had a natural disaster, or I had a bankruptcy. But you realize in collapse that it actually never is restored to your former functionality. It might even out for a while, but it never goes back to what it was. There's always something, and I more recently, just before I was writing Spells for the Apocalypse, I fell down some stairs and missed the last couple steps and broke my foot. And I was going outside to connect with nature because I'd just come from a doctor's visit where I was advocating for my child who is neurodivergent, has multiple diagnoses, and I was trying to advocate with our doctor, and we actually got into an argument. I got into an argument with my doctor, and it was so agitating for me. So I was at home and I was like, you know what? I need to go outside and I need to connect with nature. But I was still kind of having that conversation with like patriarchy in my mind. I was still fuming and I lost the last couple steps and I broke my foot and it never really goes back. You know, it was like it's been a couple years now and you never really totally recover. You always remember that wound. It's always a little weakened there. And I think collapse can be a really overwhelming concept for people, but we actually have all gone through collapse and we actually all know how to adapt to collapse because we have these personal experiences. Mine was bankruptcy. It could be a illness. It could be a divorce. It could be bereavement or death, but we go into a freeze state. We have a lot of survival energy that kind of gets locked up. And when we're coming out of the freeze state, the first thing that wants to happen is that survival energy wants to come out. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes that's challenging. But what I realized having studied collapse as a state and as a social experience over a long time is like, actually, we are all going to experience it individually and collectively. And it's helpful to recognize the skills we've already developed and become very intentional about the places where maybe we have some gaps. Maybe we need to become a little more skillful because it's never going to go back to what it used to be. It just isn't. It never is.
Yeah, boy, you know what? And this is what I really like about you as well is it's so honest, but it's also so helpful because we're not glossing over what's happened or what's happening or that thinking that you're just waiting for things to go back to what they were. We're starting from here. And we're going forward. And even, with something like a bankruptcy, presumably, I think it's supposed to be like off your records after 7 years or something like that, right? And you're supposed to be back to normal and your credit's supposed to be fine, etc. But even just this sort of mental and psychic wound of that happening. I mean, I've definitely had sort of financial extreme distress before. And it doesn't go away. Even when you've done the work, every time there's a big financial decision coming up, the first place you go is right into there. And then you have to work through that again. Thanks for that, because what it also did was give us, we've already done this. You've already done this. What's happening? It's already happened. And as you say, we built skills already. And so how can we sort of bring those to the table, because we're not starting with zero tools. We're actually starting with a great deal of tools. And speaking of tools, this, decided it wanted to come out as I was shuffling, which is the Queen of Pentacles, right?
Yeah.
And so, I've been thinking, and actually, funnily enough, this will come up again, but I've been really using Pentacles as my sort of, something I've been focusing on, especially for this year, because I'm trying to reframe my relationship with money and trying to see Pentacles as more of resources instead of coins. And what does resource mean? And so I've been focusing on relationships and opportunities and the magic of aliveness. And I love that the Queen of Pentacles came up, directly related to what we'll be talking about today, because there's the money for renewal, for fertility, for, reminding us of March and April. There's all of the beautiful growth that's happening. There's the calmness and the serenity and the focus on the magic of aliveness, on resources, what actually matters, not what doesn't matter.
And a robustness in the nervous system. If the pentacles are related to the body, there's a capaciousness, there's some regulatory flexibility, if we can use the language of polyvagal theory, but there's the capacity to be skillful with our responses so that we aren't hijacked with overwhelm and we're not thrown into that freeze state.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. Okay. So the first part, so here is Carmen's book. And if you are listening, it's a gorgeous, smaller hardcover book. It's a lighter purple with beautiful symbols on the front. It's really reminiscent of Carmen's first book that I also have. And many of my beloved people have it because I got it as gifts. The Spirited Kitchen. So they make a beautiful, on your bookshelf, you should get both because they look beautiful together. But in the first part of your book, it's called Part Magic, Part Self-Help. And where did you begin with trauma-informed witchcraft, which is so great as a place to begin. Can you speak to this a bit? Because trauma-informed gets bandied around a lot by folks who perhaps don't really understand what it means and why it's important. And I mean, you've already, even when we're talking about the Queen, you're bringing up somatics. And we know that you have quite an understanding of trauma and trauma-informed, but for folks who might be new to this concept or why we might use that in tandem with witchcraft and spell work, can you shed a bit of light on that?
Yeah, when I'm talking about trauma-informed witchcraft, I'm bringing the animist lens. I don't think you can be a witch without being an animist. You could be an animist without being a witch, but I don't think you can be a witch without being an animist. You either believe in the ensoulment of all the other beings that are not human, or you don't. And so therefore, if you do, then you believe in the voice, choice, agency, and consent of all other beings as well. So we enter into relationship with the other than human realm from that place. I think one of the reasons why this is so important when we're going through collapse is because if we proceed as though the rocks, the trees, the ravens, the air are as aware of us as we are of them, then we are forced to be in the question of how do I want to be in relationship with them? I think the trauma-informed piece is that you shift from what can I get out of this spell? How can what is the benefit I can get? Can I get the surplus goodness that is in that crystal or in that energy and have it for myself? And instead you're in this sort of sexy collaboration with the greater benevolent forces, and everyone becomes your neighbor. And in collapse, that is going to be our strategy. That is how we're going to get through collapse, is in community and in relationship and in togetherness. And we need to find ourselves mirrored through nature. We need to be able to see ourselves and be willing to be seen. And in order to do that, we need to go into like the very deepest part of our sort of internal moral compass. What are my values, and are these actions in alignment with my values? If I say that I value anti-capitalism, then I can't be hoarding the energy of this ally. I can't be over harvesting this botanical. I need to defend these spaces, and I need to defend the defenders of the water and that sort of thing. So I wanted to bring that into Spells for the Apocalypse so that this didn't in any way seem like a trap door, like we can sidestep collapse, because we can't, because we are in relationship, and we want to proceed as though everyone's voice, choice, and agency matters. So in the book, I just sort of like, as you say, it's a small book because my publisher wanted like a Spirited Kitchen without recipes, and they wanted something small and gift booky. And that wasn't actually the book that I pitched them. I wanted to do something different. And they said, no, but would you do like an extension of the Spirited Kitchen? And I was like, well, that's not really where my heart is. But they said, will you pitch us some ideas? So I pitched them 4 or 5. And I very much live by the motto of sell them what they want, but give them what they need.
Yeah.
So I was like, I would like to do,
I'm gonna
you want a
sneak
gift
in
book.
what I need. Yeah.
Exactly. And so they wanted a gift book. They wanted something like small and gifty that would go in like gift shops and things. And I was like, well, but I want to write about collapse. So
just the perfect Christmas gift. Here you are.
Yeah. So here you go. And I do think though that the book just wanted to come out at this time and help us recognize like this is a traumatic, sensitizing event, even when you see it coming, even when you know, oh God, he's going to win, even, it still is devastating when it happens. And if we treat this with the seriousness that I believe it deserves and needs, then we need to recognize, oh, we are in a trauma response right now. And so even something as simple as discerning what my preference is, what my values are, who I am and what I care about is a form of trauma resilience. So this is a little gifty book that is, as the kids say, I'm going to hold your hand while I tell you this. It's like, I'm going to hold your hand. And this is a companion or a thing for you to hold on to and press to your breast that is going to affirm, yeah, this is collapse. This is what's happening. And we know how to attend to trauma. And so, yeah, the book weaves in the principles of trauma recovery and neuroscience that have been really blossoming in the last 20 years. And thanks to things like TikTok and the internet, we are able to share with each other without needing to have mediated through a very slow moving medical system. So it's like taking everything that I've learned in trauma-informed practice and putting it into something small and digestible that's really practical for this moment. So it was just a way to let people know this is a moment of great need, and it is a traumatic event, but we know actually how to move through this to restore our response and restore our mobilization and restore our resilience.
I couldn't love all of that more, because it's so, again, and this is going to come up as a theme today, but it's so honest. And as you say, it's the like, I'm going to hold your hand, because what's more loving than telling someone the truth? Yeah. We're not glossing over, we're not bypassing. And I think, Carmen and I are recording this on January 22nd. So we've just had a rough couple of days that, again, most of us knew were coming. And then, even then, you find yourself being surprised, as one word could be used. And so it is lovely to not only, say, this is happening, right? Affirm it for people, but then, and here's what we do. And by the way, as I said before, and as you keep saying, we know what to do. I'm going to help you through it. And so, sort of relating to that with the idea of freeze, as a speaking coach, one of the things that I like to teach is a system for when you go into freeze on stage. So you don't have to think of what to do. You know exactly what to do. And we start with the body, which is a somatic response as well. We know how to align ourselves. Then we move to breathing. Then we move to speaking. So there's a system, so you know what to do. And you can actually even recognize that you're in freeze, because that might be a new concept to people as well, right? Mm-hmm. Why can't I move right now? What is happening? My brain isn't working. Here's what we do. So I love it. It's naming, affirming, and here's the plan. My word for this year is magic, because I'm taking a page from Rachel Pollack's views on the suit of Pentacles and Tarot, which is funny, not funny that the Queen came up, and focusing on the magic of aliveness, the curiosity and wonder that comes from an elevated human experience. And that, of course, does not mean good vibes only, but instead the true understanding of who we are, where we're at, and what is going on. In your book, you have a quote about the numinous. And for those who are learning about Carmen today, Carmen's group, where she and multiple guests teach, is called the Numinous Network. And I want to read, because it really did give me a beautiful feeling and, goosebumps as I was reading it. A signature of the numinous is a sense of poignance. Poignance is my favorite dilemma. Poignance is like beauty and pain swirling together. In the words of the artist formerly known as John Cougar, it hurts so good. And a couple of weeks ago, I did a solo episode on rituals and spoke to how they got me through 2024, which was a long period of both releasing grief about my expectations of how things would be and coming to terms with how things were and how they seemed to be playing out. And certainly this was sort of like collapse as a whole, but also collapse in my own little micro world. And I talked about some of the things I did: cord cutting, candle spells, carving intentions into them, shadow work. When we look at the rituals that you cover in your book, I want to read them. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where I'm going with this? Anxiety, confusion, disquiet, fear, loss, predicament, burnout, despair, dread, grief, overwhelm, rage, and stagnation. And again, this ties back into what I've mentioned, you've mentioned. We're not fucking around here. Like, we're not going to pretend like we're working towards, like, let's move into the light. First of all, we need to address this stuff, and we need to be honest about it and use words that are real and not glossing over. And so when we're faced with the reality, with the different tools to help us keep our equilibrium strong, why was it important for you to name the rituals in this, I don't even want to say negative, but I will say honest and difficult in terms of the topics? And then from there, what would you say is the most important ritual in the book?
So I proceed as though truth is stabilizing. So there's a somatic experience with something resonates or feels or sounds true in the body. I'm not talking about some kind of capital T truth that somebody has, a monopoly on that. There can be multiple truths, but in the body, when something sounds and feels true, it's very settling. Coherence is very grounding. And chaos is incoherence, and it puts us into a global high activation state. And so what we want to do is like contain things, and words are a really good container. We feel it in the body when somebody says, "Oh, I just feel so stagnant." It's different even than the word stuck. It's different even than the word overwhelmed. All of these things have their own magic, their own resonance, their own morphogenetic field. And in collapse, there are some very predictable responses that we can, thank our ancestors for having survived them. And in our body, our ancestors go, this is what you're experiencing. And, kind of all the bells sound in your body because somebody has said the word that is like a magic spell that kind of breaks the spell as soon as you say it. So once you can identify, oh, I think I feel anxious, right, because that's what you're drawn to. Now I know what to do about that because there are protocols. And when we think, the word protocol comes from protocola. First, proto, cola, glue. Protocol is the glue that keeps like a person or a community together. This is why we have certain protocols. You talk about when you're speaking, this is the system. It's a protocol. This is what we do, and it's going to glue us together in this chaotic moment. And so hearing the word like, oh, I am burnt out. I am exhausted from trying to hold back the wave of attacks on my bodily autonomy, or, you know, I am exhausted by the narcissists in power, you know, oh, that's where I'm at. That already is a spell. And so I think that there's something really powerful too about recognizing that when we are in collapse, we just can't function executively. It is extremely difficult to read. It's extremely difficult to comprehend. It's extremely difficult to do more than 2 or 3 steps. And I don't know if you noticed this, Megan, in the early days of the pandemic, I noticed immediately that if I sent out a newsletter with people wanting to sign up for an event, you know, you used to be able to send out instructions of like, here's the 3 steps. And people just like could not understand. The cognitive functioning really dramatically decreased. And what I started to realize was like, oh, wow, it has to be a 1 step. We have to remove the barriers because people don't have the brain glucose. There's not the cognitive capacity. This is just a very common thing in collapse. We know this in trauma work. I think many people saw and experienced it. If you were trying to get people to like follow basic instructions during the early days of the pandemic, you can see people can't do much more. So it was a little gift book. But to me, I was like, no, this is a handbook for people in collapse, so that they're like, I don't know what I'm feeling, but it feels apocalyptic. It feels bad. And I do want the magic words. And to open the book and just go, this is what I feel. I can do that much, you know, but I don't want to have to go through a whole bunch of theory and understand what's going on. I just know what I'm experiencing right now. So I think the most important spell in the book is like opening it up and being able to trust whatever the magic word is for you. If it's, and maybe it's not, you know, what we're describing now are the rituals in part 2, but there's also the rituals, which I call remedies, in part 3. And these are the resilience routines. I'm sure we'll talk about that later. You might not be feeling, you know, stuck or stagnant, despair, disquiet. You might be feeling something else. You might be feeling a yearning for something different, and you might find those in the remedies. But I think that's kind of the first spell, is like, what is your abracadabra? What is the resonant word, so that you can locate yourself? And for me, when I'm working with people in collapse, and this is what I do myself too, when I'm recognizing like, oh, I'm in a freeze response, the very first thing I do and try to tell people to do is stand up. Literally, just stand up. Just mobilize that much and bring on your arms and legs. So if you can stand up and scan the room and see your spells for the apocalypse on the shelf and like reach for it and open the page, and that is the first spell. You got mobilized. And, you know, so many of us, I think, are grasping, and capitalist, imperialist, white supremacist patriarchy interrupts our reach towards each other, towards resources. And this is hopefully something that will not be easily interrupted. It's like literally right there, like a talisman for you. So I think that's, you know, the tacit or innate ritual is just mobilize yourself enough to reach towards a resource.
Yes. Yes. And, you know, we'll for sure have lots of compassion for sometimes how hard it is to stand up when you're in that state, right? You're just like,
oh my God, I spent hours, days when I couldn't believe I was going on welfare. Like I went to the welfare office. I would drop my kid off. I was a single mom of a kindergartner, drop my kid off at kindergarten. And for 4 days, I then drove to the welfare office thinking like, well, I'll try to get there when nobody's there. I had so much shame and I was so in disbelief. I was so numb. And of course, there's always people at the welfare office. They're always waiting outside. There's never a time when no one's in the welfare office.
Right.
And so I would stay there from like 9:05 to right before I had to pick up my kid. And I would like cry and sleep and cry and sleep and cry and sleep. That was all I would do. And finally on, you know, in the last hour before I had to pick up my kid on Friday, I like walked in just utter shame and disbelief, I totally get the, not only the numbness that overtakes you, but also the shame of like, I shouldn't be feeling so weak right now, or I should know what to do, or I shouldn't be feeling so non-functional. What's the matter with me? Of course, now looking at that, it's like, oh, again, capitalist, imperialist, patriarchal,
that's sort of always the answer.
I've internalized it, right? Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, I fully get the numbness and the utter disbelief and the shock, even when it's coming at you like a slow moving train, it's still so shocking. What I love about that in retrospect, though, is that speaks to something so deep about our moral fiber, that there's something about this that is so egregious to how I feel the world should operate in terms of compassionate responsibility for our neighbor, in terms of, being able to see and accept people without shame or blame, that it's not our fault that we are in this fucking dystopia right now. I sort of love the spirit of the piece that is like so shocked, because it speaks to your moral compass about just how egregious, how utterly horrifyingly wrong all of this is.
Yes. And those things, those little anchors as well, right? I still have feelings about this, or, the little points that we learn, they're so important to the shifts that need to happen as you start to untangle from everything that we grew up with, everything we were told, the way, what we, might have been promised things would look like, et cetera, even wanting that, like, and then realizing, actually, I fucking don't care about this. And also I don't have to. If I want to spend 3 hours searching for 4-leaf clovers in my backyard, or, finding the bunny droppings just to make sure that the bunny keeps coming, like that, to me, there's no like getting ahead or reaching the financial goals. Like, I mean, we do live in a system where we probably need a certain amount of money in order to be functional, especially when we're parents. But all this stupid stuff that we were sold that we needed, or that we needed to participate in, or that people should care about, the green light to start to untangle from it is so powerful. And those small moments where we just realize, wait a minute, I don't need to care about this, or how do I release this from my body, are paramount to the shifts that can start to happen for you, and the true joy that you can start to feel, regardless, because it is still possible to have joy in these times. And in fact, denying that to yourself is problematic, because it stops you from being a functional human who can help others. And not that that's our only function, right? But
no, totally. And that piece too about, yes, we want to release this from our body, and yet I'm kind of like, do we?
Right.
What I would like is for this to shape our nervous systems, and that is what collapse is doing anyway. What we want, though, is for it to shape our nervous system so that we recognize it when it's happening, or we recognize something that is like a moral injury, and we allow it to shape our character. And if we allow it to shape our character, then we will feel compelled to intervene on others' behalf, or speak up, or, if we see a Roman salute, we give a Shawinigan handshake. I don't know if Americans know what that is.
That was not a Roman
Shawinigan
salute.
Years ago. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, the Shawinigan handshake is, this is years ago, but the Canadian Prime Minister, there was a protester really in his face. I'm not endorsing this, but it's called the Shawinigan handshake because there was a protest in Shawinigan, and the protester got so close to him that the Prime Minister of Canada grabbed the protester by the throat, front and back, and threw him to the ground. Yeah. So, there is an
Gentle
impulse
Canada.
to protect. Yeah, exactly. But I think that we should allow collapse to shape our character, that we mobilize very quickly like that in the face, that we say, no, that flag's coming down, that hate speech is coming down. Like, that's what we want to mobilize into. So it's not, as you say, we're not trying to move to the light, or just always be a shining emblem of equanimity, that sometimes we want to mobilize in rage and in just like a full body no. And I think that's also really great. And when we have access to a greater range of responses, then we have access to more of that joy and awe and connection and movement and other things that I get into in part 3. But if we close down to the ones that are challenging, we are also closing down and reducing our sort of window of tolerance, even for the good stuff. So what we want to do is expand and become more spacious, more capacious, more skillful, with a greater range of both the difficulty, but also the plus side is that we get a greater access to the greater range of joy and beauty and connective qualities as well. So they go hand in hand. This is kind of the blessing and the curse of collapse. And in trauma work too, I say this all the time, is ultimately we just have this one body. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of like the blessing and the curse is, we just have this one body. It kind of doesn't matter if your response comes from a thing that happened to you, your neurobiological makeup, your neurotype, all those things, they matter to the extent that it's good for that coherence. And maybe certain things are going to work better or worse, but ultimately you just have this one nervous system. You have this one autonomic response. You have this one brain, and that's where we have to work. And so if we close down and contain and restrict what we can grapple with, then it closes down, restricts, and contains what we can respond with.
Yeah.
So if we can expand the idea that we can grapple with collapse, we get to expand the idea that we can tolerate more love as well.
Yes. Yes. Which is the principles of shadow work too, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. And so, you've been hinting at this too. And the final part of the book is called Remedies, right? And so in comparison to what the rituals were, here are the remedies: acknowledgement, awe, celebration, conservation, nurturance, protection, appreciation, balance, connection, movement. And I'm saying this all because these words are uplifting, right? There's hopefulness in here as well, which is one of the values of the podcast. Pronking, which I can't wait to talk to you about, renewal, and wholeness. And it is like the gift. I always think of, when I'm thinking of shadow work, your capacity for joy after diving into what your body is constricting against, but saying, no, I'm going to be brave and I'm going to get into this, right? And also realizing it's not that it's not hard, but you can actually do it. And then on the other side of it, as you've mentioned, our capacity for joy, our capacity for hopefulness, a renewal of energy, moving forward with a full spectrum of humanity, and not just focusing on the few things that we like, because ultimately that's just not good for anybody. They're very different from the rituals in terms of focus. Can you speak to how important it is to work? And I think that the order of the book is really important too, right? Like the way that everything is lined out, and the, not on purpose. I think everything's on purpose, but it very specifically goes through this. So to work through the grieving process and acclimate to what's happening before we dive into the work that keeps us hopeful. And then I'm also hoping that you will talk to us a little bit about pronking, because I love it.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, the way that the book is organized does have the remedies last to anchor us, because of course we want to anchor in something that's resourcing. It's just like in a one-to-one session with a therapist or somatic trauma practitioner, whoever you're with, you know, you don't want to end when somebody's just like, okay, I finally made contact with like my deepest, darkest pain, and like, oh, time's up. Yeah, right. It's like we want to always do the amount of work that we can handle in the time that we have and the resources that we have. So we want to like scale that work so that we have enough time to, I love your word, acclimate to whatever is true for us in this moment, have a little bit of discharge of the stress or emotion or the feeling or whatever it is, you know, engage with that difficulty. And then what happens after that is we get the settling of like, okay, that feels true. That's like resonating in my body. And now some people, when I say settling, it does feel like you kind of relax a bit. But for a lot of people, it's more like, oh, now I actually have more space now. I'm not tied up in a bunch of energy of either trying to ignore or fight with this part of me that doesn't like what's happening to me, or I don't like what's going on, right? So we loosen our energy from the fight against the thing and we just be with it. We do our ritual or we do whatever our therapeutic thing is. And then we want to have enough time, because what happens after that discharge of the stress is there's that settling, and then it gets a little disorienting for a minute, because we're like, wait, I think maybe I'm gonna be okay. Like, it's like a little bit weird because we have to reorient to something. So it can take a minute to just go like, well, so what does that mean for me? What becomes possible now? What meaning do I make of this, of my life, my next steps, if I'm not all tied up in the angst and the tension of battling this thing that I don't like what's happening and I don't like how I feel. So after that, if we wait long enough in that kind of disoriented feeling, we just settle a little bit. Usually what happens is there's enough space for aliveness to come in. Something's going to want to come in the kind of space that you've made where you're not hanging on to that freeze response anymore. And what comes in is more vitality, more energy. And this process, if we wait for it long enough, we call it pronking. When it comes in, it's like pronking is what happens when you have escaped something that almost took you out. And suddenly you realize, holy shit, I'm actually okay. Yep. And the vitality comes rushing back into your body. And this actually comes from biology, like biologists watching animals. So this is what happens if you see like a springbok gets attacked by a leopard and it plays dead. And, you know, the big cat doesn't want to eat dead material, so it takes off. After that sort of possum freeze response, when the springbok or the gazelle gets up, it shakes it off and then it bounds away. And pronking is that side to side kind of shimmy of like, whoa, what just happened there? We come back to life, and then we kind of are like, we're feeling ourselves. We're kind of bopping along. And I always hear like Saturday Night Fever. Like, you know, I hear the Bee Gees in my mind. It's like that, like, yeah. And sometimes it's like a big thing, like we escaped, I don't know, like you win a legal judgment or something. It's like, oh my God, you sigh, it's like, oh my gosh, sigh of relief, and then celebration. And it can also be little things like you almost got sideswiped by a bus or something and you didn't. It's like, whoa, did you see that? And then you're like, holy crow, you start laughing maybe a little, because that's the pronk wants to come out. It's like this percussive, bouncy kind of somatic response. Now, what happens under capitalism is we tend to want to leverage that energy to be more productive, or we go shopping or whatever. I used to do this like with clients. You know, you have like a good session with a client, and at the end, they're kind of like, you can see they're feeling themselves. They maybe smile a bit, and maybe they're shaking their head a little. And so, you know, I would mirror that. I would do that too. Just to sort of mirror like, yeah, you, look what you just did. And then they would leave and I would get all bouncy, and I would instantly, like, I'd want to go to the grocery store and just like look at all of the produce, because it's like I just love looking at beautifully arranged vegetables and stuff. Or, or sometimes I would want to go to like a home store and just like look at all the pillows and stuff. I'm not like a big consumer type, but it's like you find that you want beauty. You're inspired. You want to go and engage with things. And so instead of getting spendy, instead of, trying to be like, oh, I've got energy, I should like redo my website or something like that. What we want for pronking
Right.
is try to extend the pronk, try to extend the pronk. In the book, in the author's notes, I remember that scene in Jerry Maguire where Jerry, I think he like quit the job. It's Tom Cruise's, like, he's quit and he's in his car and he's like elated because he's left this soul sucking thing, and he's trying to punch the radio to find good songs.
Right.
He's trying to sing, and finally Tom Petty Free Fallin' comes on and he's just like belting it out. That's pronking.
Yeah.
And I do believe that in order for us to get to pronking, we have to have the fight. We have to have the spring. We have to have the part of us that's like, no, this matters to me. And I'm going to defend myself, or I'm going to defend the institution I love, or I'm going to defend the person beside me on the bus, the stranger, whoever it is. And then that opportunity gives us the chance to, if we succeed, we don't always, but if we succeed, to go into that sense of like, wow, we made it. We did it. I did that. That is who I truly am. Yes. When push comes to shove, that is my character. This is me. This is who I am. And so that pronk, we want to try to extend it. We want, anytime we notice it where we're like kind of proud of ourselves and feeling ourselves, we should try to rest in that and share it with other people. I just think that that's one of the signals of being in alignment with our character, with our values, with creating the world that we want to have, is that kind of one of celebratory resilience.
Yes. Yes. And, you can think of lots of examples where that, I think of alternative business courses that I've taken where they're, celebrate your wins, because the more you lean into your achievements and the things that you're proud of, even if your win is, I said no to that client because I knew that it wasn't going to be a good fit. That is, there's a pronking to that, a relief to that, or whatever, whatever. And so the more we, use that as a focusing point, and we build these memories of pronking, of like high fives to ourselves, or building, I like to talk about self-efficacy a lot.
Yes.
The more that becomes available to us, it builds our courage, it builds our capacity for seeing ourselves differently as, the hero that we would like to be, flaws and all, obviously. And then, our capacity for what we can do increases. What we see ourselves doing opens up in really wonderful ways. I love it. Okay. So when everything feels so heavy and discombobulating, right? And so I'm going from elation back to feeling heavy. Knowing that hopefulness keeps us working towards change and gives us the courage to keep going. What would you say is something we can do right now to begin the path forward for ourselves? Aside from, obviously, getting Carmen's book, which I will for sure link to in all the places.
Mm-hmm. Well, in this one, I'm going to speak to the American experience, because it is just ahead of what's going to happen in the Canadian experience. We have an election this year, and our own Timu Trump, Pierre Poilievre, is like, yeah. So the very first thing I'm going to quote from Timothy Snyder's book on tyranny: do not comply in advance. So knowing in your own body what your no is, and that you can say yes to what you want to say yes to and no to what you want to say no to, and that there are many different ways of saying no. So decide already. We can see the writing is on the wall. So do not comply in advance. And what does your no look like? Now, sometimes for some folks, that's going to be literally just kind of unsettling the settler within, the one who overrides consent, and the one who has learned entitlement, or the one who has learned that it's not okay to say no because you're just going to get overpowered anyway. There is something so important to your own character and moral fiber in saying no and defending your own no. So that could be as simple as like, yeah, just practicing saying no out loud to things before you go, yeah, I'm just not sure it's right for me. You could literally just practice saying, no, I don't think that's right for me. For some people, they might have to do quite a lot of work, right, around just that piece. And then there's kind of the other end of the spectrum where if you're a person who's like, yeah, no, everybody knows what I know is, I'm like, that's like my default is no. Maybe you might want to take that more out into the public sphere. So, maybe you take a training to be a legal observer. Maybe you start to see who's doing ice watches in neighborhoods that are very diverse populations and just go on ice watch, like there's a whole spectrum of things, but I think everybody attuning to what their no is going to be a really important part of being able to have potent magic going forward. And then my personal thing that I'm doing right now, again, from Timothy Snyder's book on tyranny, is defend institutions. And we think of institutions as like, education, the law, etc. But actually there are multiple organizations that we can think of as the social infrastructure that creates the compassionate civil society we wish. So it could be anything from like the farmers market, Wikipedia, your school board, your local newspaper, your library. I got a library. I just moved to a new town and I went down and got a library card yesterday. Like this is spellcraft. This is us forming and shaping the world that we want. So I really think that say no to what you want to say no to, and also what are you saying yes to, and actively mobilize to defend whatever that is in your community. It could be as simple as like your neighborhood buy nothing group. That's a form of mutual aid. Decide you're only gonna free cycle or thrift or secondhand your clothes this year if you haven't already. Like those kinds of things. Say no to what you want to say no to, but say yes also to what you want to say yes to. And then you will have both a ritual and you will have a remedy that you are already doing. That's what I think everybody should be doing right now. So what's your no's? What's your yeses? And take action on both.
Yep. Love it. Yep. Know yourself deeply. Ask yourself those questions. We don't always take the time to do that. Use the moons if you need to, right? What are you ready to release? What are you ready to bring in? They exist in nature. Just decide when you know what's happening with the moon that's when you're going to take a bit of intentionality, and essentially just knowing yourself, being intentional, making intentional choices, and knowing what they mean. I mean, I had a conversation with a client once about all this junk in her garage, and I said, well, is it junk or is it excessive resources? Is that actually wealth? And then can you redistribute it by taking it to the place that, gives out the coats, the place that uses old lumber? Like, how can we reframe things so that it's not just bring in constantly, buy. Like, what is a resource and what does that mean? And how do we be intentional about it? And as you say, what are your values? What do you care about? What do you want to protect? And what are you going to say no to? And how are you going to do it? And deciding in advance, again, because we know about functional freeze. We know about what happens to our brains. We know it. We've known it for a long time. Don't try to come up with something new in a really challenging situation. Decide ahead of time how you're going to handle it so that you can go into it and you know what to do. Not that it's going to be easy when you're there, just that you know what it is. Or as you say, stand up. That's step one, right? Find the book. Go get the book. Name your feeling, which we teach to kids, right? When they're freaking out, it's like, name your feeling, name it. I'm angry. Yeah. And you're like, great. What are you angry about? And then it just, what a huge communication lesson that we as adults can teach ourselves.
Absolutely. And the idea too that like collapse is cyclical. Our ancestors have survived collapse.
Yep.
It is cyclical, and the book is designed to work with the moon. So you could do a ritual on a full moon and a remedy on a new moon. And what I like about that is if you were to decide, I am going to do something to grapple with collapse this year, and that means that twice a month I'm going to do something, and one is going to be sitting with the tough stuff and moving it through, acclimating my nervous system, getting my body stronger. And the other one is going to be developing more tolerance and capacity to hold the good stuff. I mean, that in itself is a framework that helps us move through collapse. We have to attune to those cycles because collapse is here and has already been here. It's just been unevenly distributed. But like Indigenous folks have gone through collapse and they are in a resurgence of reclamation and restoration. We can look to that as a model of like, okay, so these things happen in cycles and I want to support that upcycle, that flourishing, the renaissance, right? And so if we can have that renaissance every month through our own year, we develop capacity to lead that in our communities.
I love it. I love it. Carmen, I have so enjoyed talking to you today. I'm always so grateful for what I've learned from you and, what you bring into the world. I really want to encourage everybody to go and get Carmen's book, because it's just it's beautiful and it's honest and it's loving. And if you're looking for something to help you through what feels like a challenging time, then it's going to be a reference for you, a tool to use. And we're grateful for that. And so, Carmen, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Megan. And thank you for your work. Your work is really equipping people to be leaders in their own lives and therefore have a strong impact in their communities. And we need people like that. We need people with voice and people with conviction and who also are okay with, it's not always going to go great, but that self-efficacy, that we have the confidence to know that generally we can perform as needed. And if we can't, we're going to recover in motion somehow, right?
Right.
And back on track.
Yep.
So thank you for your leadership in that and for cultivating that in others and for having me on your show and sharing me with your people. I really appreciate it.
My goodness. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. And Carmen and I could thank each other for the next hour. I'm gonna do the closing out reading of all the stuff. You can find all of the information and takeaways from today's episode in the show notes or at embracingenchantment.com. Subscribe and follow wherever you get your podcasts. And we'd love for you to leave a review. I love reading how people are finding the podcast. You can also leave a voice note at embracingenchantment.com, and we might feature it in a future episode. Find out more about Carmen and where to follow her in the show notes. Make sure to get her book and get on her email list to learn more about the Numinous Network, because let me tell you, they do beautiful and cool things. I've got 2 witches' ladders hanging in the back in the lilac tree to speak to that. You're going to want to make sure you're subscribed, because we have some exciting episodes coming up about fun ways to deal with mundane chores and further deep dives into tarot and manifesting. And you can catch up on previous episodes where we talk about tarot, human design, the question of whether magic is real, and so much more. Until then, here's to building an enchanted life.